Good evening, everyone. Such a pleasure to see you coming to today. I have to say just a couple of remarks here that we were trying to draft the flyer for tonight's event, and shall we say it was really an exercise in Middle East politics because things change at a very fast pace. So we began with Lebanon, as Mr. Itani would remember, and then tension escalated in Syria, so we added Syria, and then protests intensified in Iran with nuclear negotiation resurfacing just now. So, and then we have two aircraft, one already in the Strait of Hormuz and close to the Strait of Hormuz, and another coming closer, so we added Iran. So here expanded the scope of the title of the event of today. And at some point we realized that events in the region were moving faster than our graphic designer were willing to accommodate. Then we discovered that our event coincided with Ramadan, so we adjusted the date. As you know, the official date of Ramadan depends on the sighting of the moon in Saudi Arabia, which is sometimes confirmed on very short notice. So by then I sensed the beginning of a very small mutiny among the heroic team that helped organizing this evening, because we had to change that as well, and so we might have lost some people who might come tomorrow for an event that is today. So my apology for those who watch us who will be there here tomorrow and we won't be here. That's not our fault. Just take it on. Blame the moon, not the Center for Middle East Study. We do our very best. But it is today the good day to start, I'm told, so I'm glad we just did that. And for those of you who will start iftar tomorrow, you can begin today. As you know from past events, our mission is understanding, promoting, informed dialogue, critical engagement, and intellectual openness. Our final hope, of course, is to find, through these dialogues, conversations, some form common ground between the various stakeholders and people who come here to enlighten us. Of course, we have higher ambition, you know, like many American presidents since the beginning of time, no, not really time. We are always tempted to promote peace. And really, if presidents are not successful in doing that and government are not successful, then certainly the conversation should start in an academic setting. So this is one of our hope. Just a quick reminder, we have already several successful events over the past 2 years, and this fall only just Kenneth Roth, the former executive director of Human Rights Watch, was with us, who talked about its challenges and success in the field. We had Vali Nasser, a well-known scholar on the Middle East, who spoke about Iran grand strategy. We had Michael Singh from the Washington Institute of the Middle East, who focused on U.S. foreign policy and also on Syria. And Iran is back in the news, as you all know, watching the screens, and it's very difficult situations right now, and we have to make some sense about it, and we're very lucky to have Mr. Itani, who the Dean will introduce in a minute. So let me now turn to the Dean of the Korbel School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Just a couple of words to the Dean, who does not need a long introduction because he's well known to all of us, but nonetheless, he's been here since 2019, so we brought him just before COVID, and then we said, this is your first test. Let's see if you can do all the other tests that is coming your way, and I'm sure he has quite a number of tests that he had experience. He's a distinguished scholar of global political economy and governance. His work explored the role of ideas and narrative in public policy and also in political economy. And under his leadership, I have to say, the school has risen and ranked 12th globally among graduate programs in international affairs, something that some people forget, but we needed to remind that's an important achievement. So we're very happy at the CMES to have a dean who has supported us and continue to do so. So thank you so much, and looking forward. Please join me to welcome him.
Well, welcome. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Micheline, for those kind words. It's really a pleasure to welcome you this evening to a really important topic, and to say a couple of words at the beginning about the work of the Center for Middle East Studies and its director, Micheline Ishai. and of course to welcome our guest this evening. It is indeed very timely, as I was just saying to our guest earlier. It's always timely in the Middle East. There's always something, but it's as you all know, in particular right now, quite fraught with respect to what will happen in Iran at the moment. But let me say a few words about the Center for Middle East. It's you know, the conversations about the Middle East are often reduced to slogans, and you know, we should acknowledge, you know, the passions run high and when we talk about these issues. But you know, the CMES, the Center for Middle East Studies here, has really done something important, I think, in creating a space where we have deep, nuanced, and serious conversations. CMES has really become an important intellectual hub here at the school and indeed on the campus at the University of Denver. It's a convening platform for conversations like tonight, bringing together scholars, diplomats, military professionals, students, journalists, community members who are willing to engage in some of the difficult questions thoughtfully and seriously. It's not just that we get great speakers, as we'll have this evening. It's really the tone and the nature of the conversations that we try to hold here in general at the Korbel School, of which I'd say CMES is a real exemplar. You know, these things matter. Universities, you know, really are not intended to be places that or merely express outrage at events, although passion is important, and we certainly support the right of people to speak. But they're ultimately places where we try to think thoughtfully and seriously about these issues. And so that's what I see here in the kind of events that the CMES has sponsored, including this evening. So I want to express deep appreciation to the team here for, as Professor Ishai mentioned, a lot of complications of pulling together an event like this. So thank you to all the staff work behind this. It's really an example of what this kind of work, you know, how work like this should be done. Thank you all for being here again this evening. I want to say just a quick word. I probably don't need to say this, but in the spirit of the kind of conversation we have here, a few ground rules. These topics on the Middle East in particular, but also others that we deal with, can be quite contentious. So we want everyone to listen respectfully, even if you disagree with what is being said. Mass flags, offensive signs, slurs, personal attacks are not permitted. Freedom of speech does not extend to interrupting or denying the right of others to speak or to listening. So I don't expect any of those issues, but we want to make that clear in terms of what are the rules at DU in terms of not allowing heckling, insulting, or disrupting speakers or guests. I do not, as I say, expect that to be a problem. There'll be a time for questions. When you have a question, make it a question and ask it respectfully. And now for tonight's conversation. Our speaker this evening is Faysal Itani. He's a senior fellow and co-founder of the New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy. He was previously a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. His research focuses on U.S. foreign policy toward Lebanon and Syria, Hezbollah, regional actors, and sectarianism. He teaches Middle East politics at Georgetown University and George Washington University. A native of Beirut, Lebanon, Mr. Itani earned his bachelor's degree from American University of Beirut. He holds a certificate in public policy from Georgetown University and a master's degree in international relations and economics from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. All fine institutions, even if they're not the Korbel School, by the way. We previously worked as a private intelligence analyst advising governments and firms operating in the Middle East. He regularly advises senior U.S. officials across multiple branches of government and has testified before the U.S. Congress on strategy in Syria. Interviewing him, discussing with him this evening is our own Professor Micheline Ishai, Director of the Center for Middle East Studies, who probably needs no introduction to most of you. She's a distinguished professor of international studies and human rights, an internationally recognized scholar whose groundbreaking work has shaped our understanding of the history and evolution of human rights, as well as critical debates on the Middle East. At the Korbel School, she has built CMES, as I've already said, into really a vibrant platform for serious and nuanced dialogue on one of the world's most consequential regions. She's regularly invited to speak European and Middle Eastern capitals to engage high-level discussions on the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, for example. So we're deeply fortunate to have Professor Ishai here as a colleague and as a leader of our academic community. So please join me in welcoming Professor Micheline Ishai, who will moderate, and our guest this evening, Faysal Itani. Thank you.
So thank you so much for this kind introduction. My mother would have been very proud. So I have so many questions to ask you, but I'm going to just start with something a bit broader. We have gone through 2.5 years of tumult in the Middle East, and having analyzed the region evolve over several decades, what feels genuinely new to you or most misunderstood about the current moment in Iran, Lebanon, and Syria?
Thank you very much for the introduction and for this question. I would start by saying over the past couple of years, so I've been looking at the Middle East for a better part of 15 years. Over the past couple of years, the thing that surprised me and forced a shift in my own thinking, but also among our national security institutions in the United States, is that we had made presumptions about the capabilities of who the US had identified as adversaries. I think chief among them Iran, but also several militant groups linked to Iran, or even Bashar al-Assad in Syria, the president of Syria, despite his weak position. Over the decades, I think these things have taken on a character of permanence in our brains and our calculations. What we saw over the past couple of years is that either we overestimated the capabilities of these particular players, or we underestimated the degree to which their enemies had developed their own intelligence and military capabilities and more kind of sophisticated ways of looking at the region around them. So by the time we realized this called for a new set of policies and calculations. We haven't made them yet, really. So we're still kind of trying to figure that out. The second thing I think that changed, that, to be fair, people have been talking about for a long time, but I didn't really get it in time, which is this delegation of kind of regional responsibility from the United States to regional actors that include Saudi Arabia, Turkey, other Gulf states as well, and Israel, although Israel is a more complicated actor in this equation than the other Arab states. So this idea that the US is not fully but partially disengaging from the Middle East and trying to put together a very loose coalition of actors that can achieve their own balance within the region, and it won't take as much American attention and resources anymore. I think that's the second biggest shift, and it's happening as we speak. It didn't start now, it started a few years ago, but I think it's been accelerated under the current Trump administration for reasons that have to do with the administration's worldview, but I think because of bigger shifts that have been happening in geopolitics in general. So there's probably more than those two, but those are the two I think most about.
Yeah, certainly wants to follow up on this, but there's a burning question that I would like you to focus before I get back to the Board of Peace, etc., that you just referred to. And the burning question is, now we are at this round 2 of the Geneva summit with respect to negotiation between the United States and Iran. And so the question, the Iranians said they're never going to dismantle any nuclear program. And the Americans said there is no way that they will move forward if there is no dismantlement of the nuclear program. So do you think we're at the brink of war? There are 2 aircrafters that are just coming close to Iran and threatening to the Iranian government into a war. What do you think is going to happen? So I'm just going to start with the breaking news question.
No, that's fair, and understandably, that's the question everybody's asking because it's the highest impact scenario if there's a war between the United States and Iran, right? I don't feel totally comfortable answering this question without talking also about what's happening inside the country.
Okay.
So, but having said that, when it comes to these maneuverings on the diplomatic front, we'll do this and we won't do that. We have to see this kind of posturing as a negotiation also tactic. So a couple of weeks ago, President Trump literally said, or not literally, but he basically alluded to the fact that he is thinking of killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. And Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei needs to be careful for his own personal safety. Does that mean he's going to do it? It's possible, but I wouldn't take it as proof of that. And what the Iranian regime is saying about their own positioning on what they will or won't give up about with their nuclear capabilities, these are starting points in a negotiation, and they're all tied also to this huge thing that's going on in Iran itself. So again, I look at this, it's not quite noise, so it's not meaningless, but it's just maneuvering ahead of what the real conversation is. And because the real conversation is tied to domestic developments in Iran, it makes this whole thing much more difficult to predict than if it was just a standoff over the nuclear capability of Iran, in my opinion.
So can we just, if you want to go to the domestic politics of Iran, can we just ask you with what the scale of the student-led, I mean, not the student, the protest movement, what does it tell us about the regime and the viability, the legitimacy, and its stability as a country in this process of negotiation?
Yeah, I think this is the perfect and correct question. So I make it a rule whenever I analyze anything happening somewhere else. I'm very careful about saying a regime is legitimate or illegitimate or has legitimacy or not, because ultimately I don't have that data about what's going on inside the country and how people feel about it. But we do know a few important things. One of the important things is there's a large chunk of the Iranian population that doesn't like this regime. And they deeply dislike it, they mobilize against it. It happens over and over at different points in history, depending on what the particular trigger is. Now it seems the political economy of the country and inflation and unemployment with the trigger, but it's happened several times. I don't know how many of those people there are. And I also don't know, frankly, what's happening day to day on the ground in the country because we have a media blackout. We don't know, we don't have the information. The authorities control telecommunications in the country. So the authorities obviously have an incentive in telling us everything's under control, this is an isolated problem set. And everybody who's protesting obviously has an incentive to tell you this is very, very big, it's unprecedented, we're out here on the streets every day. And that's because these two parties want different things. One party wants the regime, wants to demoralize people who are trying to oppose it. And the other party is, I mean, I think really what the golden kind of, the holy grail of this is, if there's an international intervention against the regime, because that's probably the easiest way to bring that regime down. If we don't know how many people there are, we don't know the scale of the protests, we don't even know how many people are being killed by the security forces. We hear different numbers every day. If we don't have this information, we don't know whether there is a kind of critical mass of people that are doing this and putting enough pressure on the regime such that the regime has to make difficult decisions. Because there's two ways these protests can make a difference. One way is that literally millions and millions of people would just put so much pressure on the regime that the regime just collapses. That can happen, although it's very difficult, it's usually very bloody. The other way to do it is to put enough pressure on the regime such that people inside the regime start asking themselves, what is the right way to handle this problem? So in every conversation inside even the most autocratic regime, somebody smart is saying, look, people don't like us. We can't go kill 100,000 Iranians. This is something the country will not absorb. It won't take it. So we have to find another way to deal with this problem. And there are the hardliners who are saying, if you give anything to the protesters, they're going to want to take more, and then they're going to end up at our gates, and they're going to end up bringing down the regime. We don't know what that conversation is internally, but probably it's being had. At the moment, personally, I could be wrong. I mean, this is just limited information. I don't think the opposition has what it takes to bring about the collapse of the regime. I think this country is very, very big. There are 90 million people in it. There's many different types of points of view. It's very pluralistic. And the degree of organization and coordination you would need to do something that decisive inside this context, it's hard. And look, Iran has what we call the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. These guys are, they're a military group in the sense that they have aircraft and navy and an army, but that's not their role. Their role is to protect the regime. That's been the case since 1979, since the regime created them. Those guys are well-armed, well-financed. They have infiltrated a lot of the population. They're tough. And when you have 1 million, 2 million people in a country that are willing to do all sorts of awful things to people, then it's just very, very hard to overcome them. That's just the truth. It's not. It's almost the science of these protest movements. We see it elsewhere, not just in Iran. So you'd need a kind of split within them or somebody to break away with a different strategy. We just haven't seen any of those things. Now, having said that, I know I've been talking for a long time about this particular issue. There is a way to, I'm going to put it in quotation marks because I don't necessarily endorse it, solve this problem. And that is if you have an overwhelmingly powerful outside force just come and impose what they want to impose. They can kill the entire leadership of the IRGC within a month. And that would solve the problem. The regime would be gone. Now, whether or not that's a good idea or anyone is seriously contemplating it, I think that's a different question. But that's my question. That's my answer about the domestic situation, at least.
So allow me to unpack a little bit what you just said. So legitimacy, even though you might not have the capacity to have the press in Iran, it's pretty clear that the Iranian population had suffered from drought, economic crisis, and a high level of unemployment. And with those objective facts, it's enough clear that the regime has been somewhat delegitimized. For the first time, the protest has not brought together just students, but the people, the merchant class, the Bazari, who tend to be much more traditional and tend to just usually support the Iranian regime, the Iranian government. So we know that that legitimacy does no longer exist. Now you bring a second point, and I think we should unpack that. The second point being to what extent that movement that started in January 8, 9, has the capacity to move to transition. And this is sort of what you were questioning, right? Rather than the legitimacy.
No, both of those.
Both of those. Well, I might push you on the first one, maybe, and less so on the second point.
Okay.
On the second point, I think that it's clear that that is a harder sell, because if you are a decentralized group, a movement, which has suffered greatly under the brutal massacres right now of the Iranian government, and you don't have capacity to move to the next step, that you probably would need the external force that you were referring to. And even if you had the external forces, it might not be sufficient, because you need to have a transitional government that will allow you to do that. So that would be ousting a regime, and ousting a regime does not mean that you have the capacity to sustain it.
No.
So do you agree, I mean, just going back to your point, do you agree that those three things are not exactly the same?
Yes. Look, legitimacy is not a question of counting how many people hate the regime, right? The reason it's difficult to measure, we had the same thing happen in Syria in 2011, all right? The Syrian regime is as bad as the Iranian regime, let's just say that, from a kind of human rights, economic, all these things that people were upset about. And a war broke out. It was dominated by a Sunni insurgency, which was literally 70% of the country, right? And we had a regime that was protected and composed of, the IRGC of Syria was composed of Alawites, who were 8% of the population, right? So if I do my math and I look at this country where all these people hate this regime, the regime's accomplished nothing. I mean, the Iranians at least accomplished some things. The regime accomplished nothing. And it was hated by big, broad swaths of the population, and yet it stuck around for 14 years. What happened? Didn't we say that this was an illegitimate regime? As it turns out, there are people who don't like the regime but will stand by it. And there are people who don't like this whole situation and will do nothing. And there are people who will go risk their lives and put them on the line to take the regime down. And there are people on the regime side who risk their lives to protect it. I'm not saying they're legitimate or they're not. It's really not my call to make. I'm saying this is it's a tricky analytical tool. When we're trying to understand where things are going, it's very difficult to measure. Now, the issue of taking down a regime versus reconstituting one, of course these are two very different things. And if they were not different things, I think somebody would already have taken down the regime. But the United States understands, at least this leadership understands, and the Saudi leadership, which hates Iran, and the UAE, and everybody else who hates Iran, everybody in the region doesn't like Iran. But all of them don't want this regime to fall. And that's because they understand decapitating a regime is not the same as reconstituting a government. So that's 100% true. I will also add one more thing when it comes to defense of a regime and how difficult it is to take down. Sometimes we think of like support as broad support, broad but shallow, as in everybody kind of likes the regime, but most people are not going to die for the regime. But in Iran, you have what you call deep and narrow support. So you have a few institutions of the country and some of the population that are willing to shed a lot of blood to protect the regime and to defend their own interests. It's not just about protecting the regime. So when you have deep support that's narrow, sometimes it's easy to miss that. But you have to also pay attention not just to numbers, but also who has the means of inflicting their will on other people. And in Iran, I promise you, there are substantial numbers of people who've been the Basij, the IRGC, all these institutions that the government has built. That's their job. They're experts at putting down these movements.
So just, sorry for interrupting. I don't mean if you have to continue. Just so, what are your potential scenario if there is an impasse that the United States and Iran, they found themselves in a deadlock as a result of those summits? What do you think are the potential scenario moving forward? Would the United States try to hit some military sites? Would it just not do anything? What do you think could happen?
So there is the first scenario, of course, that nothing happens, right? Nothing sometimes happens. So we go through this, Iran survives at least this wave of unrest until the next wave comes, we don't know. And the United States decides this isn't worth the complication, so let's move away from it. We try to put some diplomatic pressure as the United States government, but nothing happens. I'm not sure that's the most likely scenario because I think President Trump will be so tempted by this situation as to want to exert pressure on them and get some concessions on this nuclear program, dismantle your nuclear program, and uranium enrichment, whatever it is that the White House wants. I don't know what they want. So there is an opportunity here to press the Iranians on this, and the Iranians, of course, will then have to make a difficult decision. If they believe that the United States is willing to attack them, then my belief is, yes, they will give the concessions on the nuclear agreement. Of course, I don't have any doubt over that. If they don't believe it, well, then we'll see what the U.S. actually wants to do. The thing about this stuff of probably what they'll communicate to them if they're in a negotiation is this. You have until this date to come up with a solution to the problem of this nuclear issue. If you don't do it by this date, here's what we will start doing. We'll start doing X, Y, Z in Iran. If you don't do it by that day, we'll escalate to X, Y, Z in Iran. This is clever on paper, and sometimes we do try to do these things. Unfortunately, the second you start launching bombs at a place and starting a war, you don't 100% control where it goes. So we don't know what happens in Iran if there's a war, a US attack, and a split over this nuclear enrichment issue and a popular uprising at the same time. That thing can go out of control. So it is a dangerous period. Now, I don't see a scenario where the United States makes a decision to take down this regime. I just don't see it. They don't want to do it. I mean, I don't want to be crass. I don't think they care about the protesters and about all this stuff happening on the ground. They just want less trouble. And all of the US allies in the region, with the complicated exception of Israel, maybe we can talk about that separately, all of them don't want the Iranian regime to fall. So if the US doesn't want it, and everybody in the region doesn't want it, then why would it happen? Unless by accident.
Okay, so we'll circle back to this. Let's just review a little bit about the Iran former proxy movement And so I'm thinking about Hezbollah. We know that just yesterday or just this week, the Israeli militaries have intercepted or neutralized some Hezbollah operatives, and there is a continuation of escalations in the southern border of Lebanon. The question is, do you think that the current government, technocratic government, has the capacity to defeat Hezbollah?
You talk about the cabinet in Lebanon?
Yes, in Lebanon.
This is a complicated question. First of all, just to set the stage a little bit for my answer, there's supposed to be a ceasefire in Lebanon.
Please do, because
there's supposed to be. There was a war between the Israelis and Hezbollah, starting from October 2023 after the Gaza attack, but then escalating rapidly in the summer of 2024 and going on for another few months. It decimated Hezbollah's leadership. It took out most of their heavy weapons. They took a very bad hit, and their constituency, the Shia Lebanese who live in the area where most of the war took place, also were very heavily punished. They lost their property. They were displaced. It was a disaster for Hezbollah and for their constituency. So in the aftermath of this, the Lebanese government, which currently is, the president is a former army commander. The prime minister is a technocratic, pro-Western, I don't like that phrase, but he's of the West and its institutions, I'll put it that way. Both of these people have good ties in Washington, especially the president, and the army has very, very, very strong ties with the Pentagon and with the White House as well, and State Department. They look at this as an opportunity to solve a long-running problem in Lebanese politics, which is, what do we do about this militia that's armed, that's better armed than the government, better armed than the army, that represents one sect in Lebanon and is aggravating other sects in Lebanon, and that is basically conducting its own foreign policy vis-a-vis Israel and Iran and stuff like that. So naturally, they kind of smelled blood, and they struck a deal with Washington to start to disarm Hezbollah, and it's supposed to take place in phases. It's supposed to start at the southernmost end of the country and move forward until there's no more Hezbollah. In truth, no one thinks Hezbollah is going to give up all their AK-47s and RPGs, but they're not going to have any more like heavy weaponry and significant weaponry. So far, this has gone on, not because there's been a confrontation between Hezbollah and the army. There's been no such confrontation, but because Hezbollah has calculated that in the aftermath of that war, they can't afford a clash with the Lebanese army. It doesn't mean they wouldn't win. It just means they can't afford that fight. So they're basically just withdrawing. The Israelis have been going after them pretty much every day since the ceasefire went into place. They're killing their middle and lower level fighters, and whether or not that is within the purview of the ceasefire or not, it doesn't matter. Hezbollah's been on the back foot, and they can't respond because they're weak. So Hezbollah is being basically pressed from all these different directions at the same time, and they, as a group, are trying to make a series of very complicated decisions. The first decision is, what do we do about our constituency in Lebanon? We've been providing them with social services, with financial support, and with protection against Israel for the past 40 years, right? Let's say, more or less successfully. We can't do that anymore. There's no more money. There's no more leadership. The South is devastated, and they just can't do it. They can't keep up that end of the social contract anymore. So what do they do about their constituency? If they escalate fighting with Israel or with the Lebanese army, then they're putting their constituency in danger yet again. Mm-hmm. And they are not, what makes them interesting is they're literally a part of the Iranian IRGC, so they take their orders from Iran, but they also have to worry about their constituency at home. They can't do whatever they want. So they're kind of stuck in this in-between phase. I don't envy them, frankly, because all their options are bad. And they're trying to avoid a collision with the Lebanese state. The Lebanese state, strictly speaking, from a kind of force-to-force ratio or comparison, cannot defeat Hezbollah. The Lebanese army isn't even earning full salaries. Lebanon's economy is shattered, so they can't do it. But what they're gambling on, and I'm not going to say it's a stupid gamble, is that Hezbollah is even worse off and therefore will not put up a lot of resistance in the face of this pressure from the Lebanese government. Let's see whether that's true or not, but it's getting more and more dangerous by the day, basically.
So would you say that despite the weakening of Iran, Hezbollah is providing funding from Iran? I mean, to what extent it survived despite the ceasefire, despite the fact that it has been just drastically weakened by Israel as of last year? So how do we explain that they're still there?
So arguably the worst thing that happened to Hezbollah is not the Israel war or the Lebanese army or the Lebanese cabinet, it's Bashar al-Assad's removal in Syria. Bashar al-Assad was basically, as Syria under Bashar al-Assad was where Hezbollah trained, where Hezbollah got most of their heavy weaponry from Iran, where Hezbollah ran away when they had to escape the Israelis. It was what you call in geek language in Washington strategic depth, basically, their ability to retreat and find friends, right? They were never ever confined to Lebanon. Lebanon is very small, and the geography in which Hezbollah can operate is very small. So they cannot operate in Sunni areas or Christian area because they won't, they can't. They cannot enforce their rule on people who are not from their constituency. They can't do it. So that's why they're pressed in that manner. One of the big sources for their funding recently was the amphetamine Captagon trade, which Hezbollah and the Syrian regime were producing together and distributing to the region. They were making a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars, which for a militia is a lot of money. So that's been cut off. The Iranians in general are were having until this emergency, a kind of deep conversation about, and this plays into the conversation with the Americans as well, conversation about what do we do about these regional proxies? You know, obviously one of Trump's demands is going to be you get rid of these regional proxies. And they don't know, frankly, what to do with them. They didn't perform well when they were supposed to perform. Hamas didn't perform well. Hezbollah, catastrophe. Even the Houthis struck a separate deal with the United States to stop attacking US shipping. So none of these assets that they spent decades training and arming, et cetera, did their job. So for them now, they have to decide what do we want to do with them. My suspicion is that they want to keep Hezbollah. You know what? Actually, I don't know what they want to do. One thing they could do is keep Hezbollah as a domestic political force in Lebanon. The other thing they could do is try their best to arm them to the teeth, but you can't do that if you don't have Syria. Syria is run by a hostile Sunni Islamist government. They hate Hezbollah. So it's not easy. It's not an easy job. So there is some money, but not nearly enough money to reconstruct what the Israelis destroyed in the south. That option is not there.
So the situation was pretty bad before October 7. Already Lebanon was on the brink of economic collapse. And do you see with the new government a possibility of, so the title of today's talk, a renewal? Is it possible that we have a prospect, despite the fact that Hezbollah is still there, the eyes of the West, the Europeans are still on Lebanon, and the United States is hopeful that they will be successful? Do you think there is any sense that something could happen?
Yeah, so let's compartmentalize things a little bit, even though they're all connected. The Hezbollah problem is the Hezbollah problem. The main problem that Hezbollah poses to others in the country is that it created a sectarian imbalance in the country that favored their own constituency, which in Lebanon you shouldn't do. History has taught us. And second, that they tend to get into fights with the Israelis that then hurt the broader country, economy, infrastructure, whatever. So it's not the only problem in the country. Some people say it's the biggest problem. Some people say it isn't. I don't want to make a judgment about that. It's a major problem, but not the only problem. You could argue that the main problem in the country is that the government doesn't function. Mm-hmm. And that there are basic things a government needs to be able to do to call itself a government. It needs to control its territory. Okay, there's the Hezbollah problem. It needs to provide electricity. It needs to provide roads, infrastructure. It needs a currency. That's always useful. It needs a banking system. Always nice to have. It doesn't have any of those things. So it cannot really meaningfully be called a government. What you're asking is how much progress can they make from not really a government to kind of a government? And that depends on a host of economic reforms and governance reforms that look economic on the outside, but are actually political. And that's what makes them much more difficult. Because without getting into the financial crisis of Lebanon and the dollarization of banks, because that's a whole catastrophic chapter in itself. I'd be happy to go into it, but some people might fall asleep. I think what they really need to do is they need to crack down on corruption. They need to force the banks to give people their money back, because the banks basically took everybody's money and it's not giving them back. They need the books of the banks to be opened so that the IMF and the World Bank can look at them and decide what the hell to do about this country. The reason that these things are not happening is because powerful people in Lebanon are rich and powerful because of the corruption of the economy. And there's one person in particular, although he's not the only person, but he happens to be the Speaker of the Parliament, and he's been that for 20-something years, I forgot, and he's running again. And he is the most corrupt person in the country, and he could also shut down any economic reform in the country that he doesn't like. He has that capability. You can just close Parliament, it's done. He's done it before with policies he doesn't like.
Do you wish us to tell us his name?
Nabi Berri is his name. Yeah, sorry. He's not the only one. There's a bunch of like mini Nabi Berris, scattered throughout the political elite, and they don't want to do that either. Whatever you think of the IMF or the World Bank, without getting into that controversy, Lebanon needs a bailout. Somebody has to bail it out. I don't know who's going to do it, but somebody has to bail it out. And if you want to be bailed out by international institutions, you got to meet them a little bit halfway and show them what's going on, what happened, what went wrong. Now we have a plan in Lebanon to start paying back depositors their money that's been trapped forever in these banks, because Lebanon essentially ran out of dollars and therefore it couldn't keep its currency pegged to the lira, and therefore the banking system shut down. We have a plan to return deposits to depositors. It's very imperfect, but it's there. We have, from the Lebanese perspective, good relationship with these institutions, with a lot of rich Gulf Arab countries who don't want to bail us out yet for their own reasons. I don't particularly blame them. And then we have the United States, which also is much more concentrating on the Lebanese army than on bailing out the Lebanese economy. So I would say I give this like a B- prospect of improving. I think there's just some formidable obstacles that are so difficult to overcome because there's structural, economic, political economy obstacles in the country. That's just my point of view. My hope is that the pressure, even on the politicians, for people to be able to eat again and survive and get their money back, that pressure will be enough to push them to make some concessions to whoever it is that's going to be gracious enough to bail out this very corrupt, dysfunctional place.
So on a more hopeful note, let's move to Syria.
Yes, sure.
So we know that Bashar al-Assad had an exit strategy that was very fast to Russia over a year.
Yes.
He didn't even tell his entourage that he was leaving. And then came, as a result of that, Ahmed al-Shara and led very quick operations and took over Damascus. Al-Shara, as some of you know, is coming from sort of Islamist jihad, a person who has reformed himself since and attempted to consolidate Syria. To what extent do you think it's possible? What is his challenges? What are his accomplishments? What are his prospects? He has been just a couple of times now in the White House discussing with Mr. Trump. What are your thoughts about?
Yeah, I've been asking the same question. Look, I think this guy is, leaving aside the Al-Qaeda background and all this baggage, he's very, very smart, very capable politician. And he's also, for me, the ultimate kind of ideal type, capital I, capital T, opportunist, in the sense that he always knows what the easy, quick path is for him, and he takes it, and he doesn't let it go. He's done that successively with a lot of things, especially on international engagement. I think the guy's been masterful on international engagement. The guy's been hosted by the White House. Mm-hmm. I don't know of any actual government on earth including Israel, that actively wants him gone. Like, I think the man has actually maneuvered himself in a position where he's the president of Syria. Some people don't like him, some people like him, but he's there, and that's not changing, which is remarkable enough, actually, without even dissecting it, for an ex-jihadi who was killing American soldiers a few years ago in Iraq. Having said that, I don't think he's some sort of genius when it comes to handling things inside his country. And this is not just lack of genius. Let it be said that this is a very difficult environment, so I do want to concede that. Syria is, I mean, in very, very bad shape from an economic point of view. Socially, it's fragmented and fractured. They've just been through a 14-year horrific civil war. So it's not like when the regime fell and this guy came to power, I was expecting everybody to love each other and get along. So that's ridiculous. I always, of course, expected that there would be communal violence, that there would be sectarian killing, that these things are always going to happen in these environments. Having said that, there were things that I think got away from him, like what happened like a year and a half ago in the kind of Alawite area of Syria, where this very small Alawite insurgency attacked a convoy of his soldiers, basically. And they killed 300 of their soldiers, which is a big operation. And then basically his troops, alongside other jihadis who are not technically part of the government, part of the army, but they're still affiliated with him, went in and killed like hundreds of civilians as a vengeance sort of thing. Now, I can't blame him for that, but it does teach me that there's a constellation within the armed forces and the people around him that can go ahead and do those things when they want to do them. And that's deeply problematic. Now, that's the Alawite community. The sad, ugly truth of this situation is that community has no capability to threaten the Syrian state. But there are others who can give them a much harder time. And that starts with the Druze, which is a faction of Ismaili offshoot, Shia offshoot, very small esoteric sect. I think there's only like a few 100,000 of them in the world. And a big portion of them are in Lebanon, a big portion are in Israel, and a big portion are in Syria. And there was another incident with them that frankly started as a local dispute with them and other people they've been disputing with forever. But then the government basically intervened, took the side of one of the belligerents, the Sunni side against the Druze. And then there were sectarian killings. There was very ugly things happening to the Druze in that area. And the government kind of, I'm not sure what to do. And then we finally condemned it, and it was a little late. And by then, the government of Israel had decided that they're going to protect those Druze against the Syrian central government. Now, that's problematic. If you are Ahmad Shara, you don't want the Israelis as an enemy taking over part of your territory. So that's a problem. The second problem happened with the Kurds, who were U.S. allies. That happened a few weeks ago, in which another kind of war broke out between the government factions and the Kurds, who wanted more decentralization. And I mean, ultimately, the government won this one, so I'm not going to say it lost. But the theme of it is this. This is a highly pluralistic, fragmented country. People don't trust each other. They're just emerging from a civil war. They don't want Damascus to come and govern the hell out of their lives. They want some level of decentralization. They want to be left alone to a degree.
Can you speak a little bit about the other actors? So there's the Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Force that has been supported by the United States. They are the Kurds who are antagonistic to the Turkish involvement in Syria. Can you just tell us a little bit how each of those groups, just for the rest of our audience, is connected to those outside actors, and why does it amplify the sectarian warfare?
Yeah, I'm sorry I skipped over that. I was trying to save myself some trouble. But really, so look, we have the Kurds as an ethnicity that live in northeast Syria. I think they're about 10% of the population. That's a significant percent of the population of Syria. Then we have a militant group called the YPG with an equivalent governance group called the PYD. Forget about the acronyms, that's not important. These guys are tied to a kind of pan-Kurdish militant movement that's based out of Iraq and Turkey. And they have, in addition to being Kurdish nationalists, which they are, they have a peculiar anarcho-syndicalist ideology that, frankly, I mean, if you're some Arab tribesman in northeastern Syria, you're not buying it, right? This isn't part of your mental map. But they got powerful because they were seen as effective light infantry, effective fighters against ISIS. So the Pentagon and CENTCOM looked at them and they said, these are the guys we need on the ground. We don't want to send our own guys, obviously, because we don't want them to die, and we don't want political problems back home. So these guys are already there. They're good fighters. They're brave. We'll give them intelligence support. We'll give them air support. And then they'll beat ISIS, which is more or less what happened in Syria. Now, Turkey sees them as an extension of that pan-Kurdish movement that's also fighting an insurgency against the Turkish government. So they invaded northern Syria to prevent that group from taking more border areas than they were able to take under American support. And that's where Turkey and the United States kind of collided in Syria. Now, this gets more complicated because within Turkey, there is a peace process between those Kurdish militants and the Turkish government, but those other branches in Syria are still active. And their expectation was that they're going to basically cash in on this sacrifice they made against ISIS to get some autonomy and decentralization in Syria. And they expected the United States to back their play against Ahmad Shara. The United States position under Donald Trump is very, very clear. That whole romance, this was a tactical alliance against a temporary enemy. All right, that's finished. So now go talk to Damascus and sort your problems out. And this kind of miscalculation on everybody's part is what got everyone in trouble and why we ended up with this mini war a few weeks ago.
So in a way, you can say that Shara is in a real quandary, to say the least. On the one hand, he has to contain ISIS, and with the assistance of the American, and we can talk about that in a second. And then he has to contain his minority group, Alawite, Druze, Christians, and Kurds at the same time. Not an easy task, no matter who you are and whether you like al-Shara or not. And so I'm wondering, since we talked before about Lebanon, if there was a model of power-sharing model that the Lebanese had instituted that could be implemented in Syria. And perhaps you want to talk about what that power-sharing model is for our audience before you answer this question.
That's a really interesting question. So Lebanon has what we call a confessional or constitutional democracy. What does this mean? It means that there are certain officially recognized factions in the country, officially recognized. There are 17 of them, I think, in Lebanon, or 18, I forget. Some of them are big, some of them are small, but everybody's guaranteed a certain portion of power, with the three largest sects being guaranteed certain senior positions: president, prime minister, speaker of the cabinet. The idea is not that everybody is equal, but that everybody has guarantees that there's only so far the government can push against their rights. So they have a stake in the game. Lebanon happens to also be procedurally a democracy, although you don't need to be a democracy to be confessional, but it is also democracy. Although a democracy where elites compete against one another rather than popular politics, at least for now. So this idea, this was a kind of conflict mitigation mechanism built into the foundation of the republic. Whether or not it's done a good job or not, honestly, I actually don't know. I could argue it both ways. You could say that a country that small with 17 people should have more violence in it, but doesn't. But maybe that's because of the confessional system. But there's no dominant, not supposed to be a dominant force politically. Now, when I talked about Hezbollah's dominance in the country because of its arms and its weapons, etc., it's not because the Constitution grants them that dominance. It's because that is an extra-constitutional dominance. So looking at Syria, right, and also another important aspect of confessionalism is the concept of mutual veto, meaning that if somebody wants something, even if they control a certain amount of seats in parliament or cabinet, it's very difficult for them to impose it on everybody else, just structurally speaking. So it's almost impossible to force other people legally to do things. Syria is not, it's, as a country, it's nothing like Lebanon. Yes, there is some pluralism, but first of all, there is 70-year history of, catastrophic governance and repression by, I'm not going to say by the minority, it wasn't the Alawites doing it, but by a regime derived from a small sect that was basically repressing everybody else in the country. So there's that. There is weak democratic institutions, very new. They're not democratic yet, but they're supposed to become so at some point. And I think the major difference, though, the major difference is 70% of Syria is Sunni Arab. So there are no majorities in Lebanon, numerically speaking. We haven't done a census in forever, but even if we do a census, we're going to discover that more or less nobody has a huge majority over other people. So no one can make a claim that Lebanon is a Sunni Muslim country, or anything like that. Whereas you can make that claim credibly in Syria, and it's my belief, and I'm not damning the place, and I'm not criticizing the place. Syria is going to have a Sunni Muslim identity politically for the foreseeable future. Those are the people that won the war. That's the amount of, that's the section of the population that feels most in debt, that feels that they have the most debt to collect from society and from the surroundings, and because they suffered the most in the war, etc. So you cannot do confessional system when there's one group that has captured the identity of the country. And I am not saying that if you go and talk to every Syrian, by the way, you could talk to a lot of Syrians who are from minorities. My mother is a Christian from Syria. You could talk to her and her constituency, and they're not saying, oh, we want it to be a Christian country. No one is saying that. What they're saying is, we don't want the government to repress the Christians. And that's a different demand. But it's not a demand that Syria take on an identity that's even equally Christian. What they understand is this is a Sunni Muslim government, but we have a stake in this country, and we deserve to have rights. And that's a different argument than the confessional argument in Lebanon, so I don't think it applies.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to move to the Q&R in the audience. So just the same question as I was asking you with respect to Lebanon, or to Hezbollah rather, to what extent do you think that Iran exert an influence in Syria? It used to be an old ally. Is it still there? It has weakened its power, but to what extent do you think it has a lingering presence?
I think there are weaknesses. Let's be honest. The Syrian regime is very weak. It does not control all the country, or nearly all the country. The place is still full of banditry, chaos, opportunism, crime, everything you'd expect after the civil war of 14 years. And one of the things it doesn't fully control is the borders and the areas northeast of the borders that even in the greatest times in this region were excellent smuggling routes for any number of sort of things. So there is still money, drugs, weapons coming over these areas. And the Lebanese, who are supposed to also help in that, haven't done it yet. They're doing it piecemeal. So there is still some Iranian influence, but it's much, much smaller, honestly. I don't think they're major players. They're not major players in Syria anymore. And I see no way they can get back to the position they lost. You could look at the Alawites, who are, a branch of Shia like the Iranians, and say maybe if they go there, but it's not possible. I mean, the geography is very, very difficult, and the hostility to them is very, very high. So I think they're more or less done there, unless the country completely fragments.
Okay, thank you. That's great. I just want to see if any of you would want to start, ask questions. Please feel free. This is a good time. We're going to just bring the microphone. I think that Mandy is rushing to grab it, and Andrea. And here there is one gentleman here who wants, I see his hand. And please don't hesitate. These are always the most interesting part of talks when
Definitely.
we have that. Okay, I'll just I think this gentleman first. And I will my note.
How do you think the relationship between the IRGC and
Can you just speak directly to your microphone and just...
How do you think the relationship between the IRGC and the regular Iranian army will affect the future of the people and the regime?
Cool question. So for the past 2 years, 3 years, I think, there's been a subtle but real shift in the distribution of responsibilities between these two actors. The armed forces, you're referring to the Artesh, the army, and the conventional armed forces, right? Like the army, the Air Force, yeah, okay. These guys, who used to be passive actors in Iran, although they are large, and they're larger than the IRGC, they've now been given the job of national security, national defense, right? So they are now the people who are supposed to correct what went wrong 2 years ago and last year and last month, I would say, and all the attacks. Because what happened, it became very clear that if you wanted to attack Iran and you had aircraft, there's no one could stop you. There's no air defense system. There's nothing. You can do whatever you want. They can't control the skies above their country. So this landed the IRGC in a lot of trouble. And the Artesh, the regular conventional army, has now been tasked over the past through promotions and resource distribution. Now you guys have to protect the actual country in the old-fashioned way, right? Which has left the IRGC, ironically, with more room and space to do what the IRGC does best, which is to repress, control the local population, protect the regime and its institutions, and run the proxy wars abroad. So I would say, if I was being negative, I would say that it's actually worse for the prospect of some sort of political opening in the country, because you're giving those people a complete policing function, and you're freeing up the others to do the conventional military stuff. That's my short answer. It's more complicated than that, but.
But could we a follow-up would be that the Artesh is more likely to defect if there is a military attack against some of the targets cited in Iran. That will be the one group versus the RCG that will defect faster, precisely because they don't have the economic power.
It is more likely to defect, but what you're describing is a civil war scenario. So it's another problem set. But yes, it is more likely to defect. I agree with you. Generally, armies in the Middle East, this is great political scientist Eva Bellin who writes about this, and she's like, if you want to know whether military force is going to kill its own population or refuse to do that and defect, you have to look at their level of institutionalization. So basically, do they see themselves as a national army protecting the country with a duty, a patriotic duty, or do they see themselves as an appendage of the political leadership? The IRGC is an appendage of the political leadership. I would argue the IRGC is going to be the political leadership of the country within 5 to 10 years. Whereas the other guys, they're still an army, so maybe there's some hope that they wouldn't.
Okay, I think that there is this lady here. Then I had a question, and I'm not sure I understand it, so whoever wrote it, I will ask to clarify. Oh, the webinar. Yes. It's whether Trump is torn between the demands from Bibi, I'm not sure which demand, versus counter demand from Putin, so I'm not sure which demands. So this is a tough question, so I'm not sure I'm going to put you on. You don't have to answer, because I didn't understand the question, but if you understood the question, perhaps you want to answer it.
I'd be speculating, honestly.
Okay, so let's move on to the next
I'm not sure.
Listening to the Iranian rhetoric, they're threatening, or they're even daring the U.S. to attack because they have these missiles that no one knows about, and they can reach all the allies. And are these bluffs, or are these credible threats? And if there is a war, do you think that Hezbollah, as they're threatening, will get involved? Kind of like a Samsonian attitude, like, what have we got to lose at this point?
Yeah. So are they bluff, or are they actual projection of capability? They're both, actually. Because there's obviously a value in bluffing and telling people you have these capabilities. I think the most vulnerable to these capabilities are actually the Gulf Arab states. The Israelis have demonstrated, together with the United States, they're pretty good at managing this problem of, it's ballistic missiles is what you're talking about, really. The thing about these missiles, though, and I'm not a ballistic missile expert by any means, but you don't really know how things are gonna perform until you try it, and until you fire them. And when you fire them, that's it. It's done. You know, you don't have any more. You have a few more, but you have a limited amount. Shooting down ballistic missiles is, in theory, technically possible, but depends how many have been fired, and depends on your luck, depends on a lot of things. I think they have the ability to do some damage, yeah. Whether or not they intend to do it, that's like, I think, the level below ultimate escalation. Ultimate escalation would be to tell Hezbollah and everybody to just go, you know, do everything you can, fire everything you have at the Israelis, you know, fire your weapons at Tel Aviv, fire your weapons. I don't know if they have them or if they reach, but that, if you were this scenario you're describing of like complete escalation and letting the proxies do what they think, yeah, there is a scenario if the regime feels threatened, like its survival is threatened, sure, I mean, that's the logical thing to do, right? You're not just keep them aside. You've invested in them. The reason there's been so much investment in these groups is partly Israel, but mostly it's to protect the Iranian regime against these attacks and to deter people. Having said that, I don't know what capabilities Hezbollah has. So I don't know if all these things were destroyed or not during the war. These, you know, Israeli military intelligence would know, and maybe they did destroy most of them, in which case it's not a very compelling threat.
So I'm going to recognize here one of the questions from my colleague Aline Grebel, who is probably on webinar, and she's asking, to what extent do you think the collapse of the economy, including the currency you were speaking about before, in both Iran and Lebanon is having a meaningful effect on the ability of this government to stay in power and at least in Iran, of fueling the protest movement?
Yeah, I think Iran is actually easier to answer. Yes, for sure, because in Iran, it is in the abstract, at least, possible for people to be all hurt by one thing and decide that they need to do something about it against the government, even though the government in Iran is 1,000,000 times more powerful than the government in Lebanon. But at least you can mobilize around these issues. Lebanon is very frustrating because you can have these problems that impoverish millions of people and throw them below the poverty line and make life hopeless for everybody, but it doesn't translate into people protesting against the government. There are protests, it's not that no one does it, but there's no systemic rejection of the political elite, which is so fascinating because if you go do that in Lebanon, the army is not going to shoot 1,000,000 Lebanese people. So it's not, they don't have the same problem that the Iranians have. What the Lebanese can't do is can't escape the structure and the dependence they have on their political elites. They're dependent on them for everything, and they can't imagine life without them. Even though they might hate them, they might want something better. Most Lebanese people do know deep down this is a raw deal. It's not a good country. People don't want to live there anymore. They leave in very, very large numbers. But they can't escape the structures of the politics. And part of the reason is that but the country is so factionalized that no one wants to go against, this is kind of a game theory problem. No one wants to go against their politicians, if the others don't all go do it at the same time, right? So I don't want to go against my Sunni politician from Beirut because I don't have any guarantee that the Shia are going to go after Hezbollah or that the Maronites are going to go after the president incumbent, right? So this creates a very, very, the cost of defecting from this awful coalition for all Lebanese people is very high, and they can't escape it.
So in other words, you're saying the decentralizations in Lebanon is what sort of hinder the same level of protest movement that exists in Iran, which is highly centralized because of the RCGs and Khamenei, which really have a much different grip and brutal grip on its population. So add that, coupled with the economic crisis that has fomented the protest movement in a very different way that in a place like Lebanon, which suffer from the economic crisis, but has a political decentralizations of divide and conquer from the way you just
That's a great way of
explained.
putting it. You know, when just my final point about this, I teach a class about Middle East politics, and I always ask my students when we get to this point, what does a revolution in Lebanon look like, in your opinion? You know, who's doing the revolting, against whom, and is it a coordinated thing, or do people go after the Orthodox leadership first, and then everybody follows suit? Who's doing it, and what does it look like? For me, it's impossible to imagine a revolution in Lebanon. Now, when there is a large enough constituency or a weak enough sectarian oligarchy, I can't imagine it happening, because most Lebanese agree that this is a bad deal. But they're stuck. And yes, it's because it's the decentralization is the problem. There's no common target. I remember when in 2005, we were protesting after the Syrians killed the Prime Minister, Rafik Hariri, in Lebanon. And we took down the Prime Minister and the cabinet and the parliament, and everything was going, wow. And we got to the presidency. And the president was arguably the worst of the remnants of the Syrian occupation in Lebanon. He had no redeeming qualities, no constituency, nobody liked him, nobody voted for him. But what ended up jamming everything up, we realized we couldn't get rid of him because all my Christian friends didn't want to go to the presidential palace. And I told them, why? This guy is just as much a scumbag as the other guys. Well, we don't want to set a precedent where we're pulling the Christian president out of the palace. I was like, all right, this is hopeless then. I mean, we can't have a revolution if everybody's going to act that way. And it wasn't just them. All of them, all the sects acted that way about their respective leadership. It's very hard to have a revolution if...
Well, it actually shows that countries that are not as homogeneous, like Lebanon or Syria or even Libya, which was proven during the Arab Spring, tend to have more civil war than capacity to overthrow their regime.
Yes.
Unlikely, this is not really the cases of Iran, because there is a much stronger centralized government, and that will be different, even though it is not very hegemonized. Wrong word,
yeah,
but it's late, long day. Let me just move to another question here that come from the webinar. What are the chances that Syria will fragment, haven't they already lost the Golan Heights to Israel? Not sure.
What's the latter part?
I'm not sure if there was a sequitur, but let's try again. What are the chances that Syria will fragment? Haven't they already lost the Golan Heights to Israel? Okay. So I'm not sure why one. Okay, maybe.
I don't think they mean the Golan Heights. I think they mean the extra territory the IDF took after the regime fell, Mount Hermon and that area. Yeah.
No, it was Golan Heights.
Yeah. I'll skip the loaded language, but I understand what they're talking about. No, I think it's very possible that Syria might fragment. Yeah, absolutely. It's because it's a pluralistic, factionalized place. And by the way, I just want to be clear when I say a place is pluralistic, I don't just mean, oh, there are Christians in it, and I mean there are clans and tribes and families and prejudices and localism and cities that hate other cities. And these pluralisms cut very, very deep within this country. There's a lot of wounds, and there's a lot of hatreds that are left over, understandably. And there's a government already doesn't control its territory, and it's dealt with wayward minorities largely through violence. And I understand why that happened, so that's not the point. But the point is that it still hasn't demonstrated the ability to create some kind of social contract between at least most of its population. I think the Syrian regime right now is running on the goodwill of the fact that Ahmad Shara overthrew Bashar al-Assad. And that is still very strong, and understandably so. But give it a couple of years, will people still feel that way? I don't know, maybe, but maybe not.
I have a follow-up on this, but I really want Juliette I can't see you behind, sorry. Why don't you stand up? Please stand up.
So sorry. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. I had a friend who took your comparative politics class in the Middle East at George Washington, actually. But I was just kind of curious on your opinion, if USAID might ever be reinstated and re-supporting the Lebanese army, do you think that would be a better or more prominent way to help disarm Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon?
So, I'm not being difficult, but I want to know, why is the premise USAID support rather than just generic like
Well,
American
actually,
support.
that's a better question. Western funding towards Lebanese armies, militias at large.
Yeah, look, so you see me here like caveat the hell out of everything I say, and I never take a good position. But actually, I think this needs to happen. And I think that I understand the communal kind of tensions inherent in any attempt to disarm Hezbollah. But honestly, I mean, it's either a country or it isn't. And if it isn't a country, okay. Then everybody just does whatever they want, like we did in the 70s and the 80s. And God bless, you know? I mean, maybe the violence will be tamped down enough if it gets local enough, etc. But if it is a country, then it needs an army, and it needs borders, and it needs a foreign policy, right? There is no way on earth Hezbollah is going to willingly give those things. No way, it's never gonna happen. And I will add another layer of more controversy. There is no way their constituency will happily accept it happening. Not because they love Hezbollah or they hate Israel or whatever, but because they were the poorest of people in Lebanon, and now they've been lifted to the top. The top still sucks, but at least they're at the top. And I don't know of any group in history, maybe there are a few, that willingly relinquishes this position. I just don't know. So they have to be won over with state development, economic development, you know, outreach, social outreach. But Hezbollah, no, it's got to go if this is going to be a country. We've been twisting ourselves into pretzels for the past 25 years, trying to make believe Lebanon is a country, but also being okay with that. And I realized why we did that, because the cost of not doing that was a civil war. And none of us wanted to destroy the country, even over the Hezbollah issue. But this is a different scenario. It's a genuine opportunity, I think, to change the balance of power in the country. And it's not going to happen without money. Now, who's going to give the money? The Saudis don't want to give it until the Lebanese prove they can do what requires money to do in the first place. So forget about that. The Qataris is sort of throwing money at it. The United States is the only power with the connections to the institutions of the country and the Lebanese armed forces, and frankly, infinite money if they want to spend it. I mean, it's not costing them anything. It's a very small amount of money. So no, with this, I'm kind of bullish that I think they have to do it. But it's dangerous, and it's not a celebratory enterprise. I mean, it's risky. So, but I have no other alternative for the country, honestly. So,
Juliette?
Hi, thank you both so much for this really engaging discussion. I was wondering how the U.S.'s intervention in Venezuela is affecting how Iran and other countries in the region are viewing the likelihood of American action.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I can probably guess that a snatch operation to take out the head of state in a hostile country. There's got to be, there is a scenario, like I said, we talked about this scenario, in which the United States kills the supreme leader of Iran. It's not super likely, but I think we can agree this is not beyond possibility. I mean, given what's been happening in the world, given the Venezuela thing. So the Venezuela thing is, I think, proof, although drastically different circumstances, that things that were once unimaginable are actually now easy decisions to take. Not only that, sometimes they work, right? Now, to do it in Venezuela, I don't know how capable the Venezuelan armed forces are in Venezuelan intelligence. I obviously don't know anything about Venezuela. But to do it in Iran would be a great deal more difficult. In a much more hostile environment, you need excellent intelligence. But hey, you know, the Israelis have already proven that they know where everyone is in Iran, and that they could do whatever they want, whenever they want. And the United States can double that. So,
well, but couldn't we say, just moving forward with this question, that in the Venezuelan case, the great majority of the population in Venezuela really disliked Maduro. I mean, and there was not much resistance, even though they didn't like the interventions of the United States to decapitate Maduro. They at the same time just let that happen, because, and who was supportive of this of government? And so the parallel, I'm just trying to go with your analogy, Juliette, and I'm just wondering, it is true to say that, if it is true to say that the great majority of the the Iranians are not supportive of their own regime, then one may wonder whether the capitation, just following that the logic, whether the capitations could be as easy as one would have projected with respect to the Venezuelan case.
That's an excellent question. And I already said I don't know, but look at it this way. If you go into Iran right now, let's say, SEAL Team X goes into Iran, blast their way into, I don't even know where he stays, and shoots him, all right? And then takes his body, leaves, puts it on TV, whatever. I don't know what happened to the Venezuelan military after this guy got off, but if you take out Ali Khamenei from Iran, you've really only scratched part of the issue, which is, yes, he's the symbolic head of state that keeps this all together. He's very important. But the truth of the matter is the clergy in Iran is not that important anymore. And the people who run the country are the people with the guns. So I don't know what the response would be if you go in and take out this old man, what happens to the rest of the elite and the regime. What the people will like, I'm sure a lot of them will be happy, sure, but I don't know what everybody else will be like.
Well, at the very least, you will terminate the ideological structure.
Yes, but
and in and of itself, that's a step. I'm not suggesting that should happen. I'm just following the logic of the question, just for the thought experiment.
Yes, you're right, and that's not nothing. So that's fair. There is an ideological center of gravity in the country. It's still the clergy. Even if it's not the center of power, you're right. It's not meaningless. It's just much more complicated. That's it.
Okay. Any other question? And I think this gentleman, but maybe Mandy, you see better than I do. Yes? Yes.
Is it working? Okay. Thank you for the great discussions. I'm actually from Iran.
Okay.
I have two questions. I was talking to my family is still back in Iran. I was talking to them yesterday about all this inflation and everything. My mom was saying right now an average person's salary in Iran is enough to afford only 3 cans of beans every day for 1 month. So it's just things, let's say red meat, protein, all that stuff are basically disappearing from people's dining tables, I'm just wondering if you see this one as a force that can eventually result in the collapse of this regime. Another thing was I was wondering what's your opinion about all these Iranians who live outside the country, all the protests that are happening to support people that are inside Iran, right? Let's say on Valentine's Day there were over 1 million Iranians outside the country that kind of went on to the streets to protest. The interesting thing to me is I was looking at all these major news outlets, CNN, Wall Street, blah blah blah. None of them actually covered those there was nothing, not even one simple news about 1 million Iranians went to the streets. How do you see this? I was wondering what you think about all of this.
Well, thank you for the insight, first of all. Look, I'm intellectually aware of the degree of economic deprivation going on, and also having studied the Lebanese scenario also very well, I understand the catastrophic, particularly inflation, and the catastrophic effect it can have on people's lives. For sure, this creates a constituency of people who think the regime has to go, is irredeemable, is dysfunctional, they hate it. It could be any of a number of negative feelings, right? I guess what the point I was trying to make at the outset was a bit more clinical. You can have regimes that everybody hates. Not everybody, but let's say 50% of Iran hates the hell out of the regime. That's a big number of people, 45 million, right? You can have a lot of people who hate a regime, but it's hard to get rid of them. And it's not the same thing. We translate in our heads, if somebody is so unpopular, how is it that they stay in power? Well, we can ask ourselves this question about the Soviet Union, North Korea, all these. That's extreme cases. Iran is not the Soviet Union and North Korea. But
it collapsed.
But I ask myself this question when I'm falling out of my analytical mode. How is it that this regime is still here? The truth of the matter is these regimes, especially the IRGC with all the violence and all the stuff they've put up with over the past 50 years, they're just very good from a technical point of view of crushing these movements. And the truth is, it's very hard to have democratic transitions if the people with the guns are shooting at everybody all the time, or shooting at the right people all the time, and torturing everybody else, or whatever. It eventually happens. I think this regime is doomed. I don't think this regime is here forever, you know? And it's not, I don't have, these prospects are poor, right? Because something is gonna give, you know, something, some confluence of circumstances. And you know what, this might be it. If there's an international intervention, maybe this is it. So that's possible. I'm just saying it's just very difficult, that's all. Otherwise it would happen more often in regimes that are clearly repressive, not only repressive, but in this case, incompetent. Repressive and incompetent. What the media covers, it doesn't cover. When did this happen, February 14? Yeah. Do you think that the story had just become like a little bit old by then? I mean, it could be as ugly as that. Like the cycle, the news cycle had moved on past what was happening in Iran. And I've seen this happen in all sorts of places. Maybe it just didn't capture attention and therefore was left alone. I think that's obscene because 1 million people demonstrating for their brethren or being shot is something that should be captured. I don't know the answer to this, unfortunately. But I agree with you, it's very significant, yeah. Good luck to your family.
Anyone else? Okay.
Hello, thank you for coming to talk today. I really appreciate it. I was just kind of curious, to what extent do you think religious differences contribute to the destability in Lebanon and Syria, in Iran, as compared to other factors like economic or security? Obviously, like the Islamic regime in Iran is pretty faulted during the protests, so yeah, I was just kind of curious.
Okay. So my experience in these kind of pluralistic societies that have a lot of factions in them, a lot of sects in them, etc. Growing up in Lebanon, I ask myself this question all the time, like trying to understand what was going on around me, right? Is it the religion aspect? You know, do we need to bring religion politics? Do we need to take it out? But I understood sooner or later, studying these Lebanese factions, that freedom of worship, your liberty, you know, your conscience, your ability to believe what you want to believe, none of them were ever at risk in Lebanon. There was no one telling anyone what to do religiously. And yet all these factions along sectarian lines went and mass murdered each other, you know? So the only way I could figure it was maybe these are best not thought of as religious groups, but as actually factions with their own historical collective memory, their own view of their role in the politics of the country, their own view of their heritage. So I'm not sure about religious differences, but certainly these identities matter a lot, yes, they do. And I would be foolish. I know some people think they don't matter at all, and that's fine, but I think they matter. But I think in an environment where there is, like Syria, for example, or Iraq, you know, where there's like mass murder of people, you know, it's not the same thing. That I think galvanizes and polarizes people in an extreme way. So when you have certain ideologies like jihadis, for example, all right, when they went to the south of Syria to kill the Druze, right? This is what some of them did to put down the Druze uprising. They did things like their rhetoric was rhetoric that was specifically against them as heretics and blasphemers and people who had exited Islam, you know, basically apostates, yeah. So that language obviously is deeply imbued with religion, you know. So that stuff does happen. When you had ISIS and the Shia, you know, it wasn't like the Maronites and Druze are fighting over the Jabal in Lebanon. Like you had people, really ISIS felt these people were subhuman people. and they deserve to die because they're idolaters. They worship Ali. They worship, you know, the whole imams, the imamate. So they deserve to die because this is what they believe. So yes, sometimes in extreme cases, it's just that, you know. But I'm not sure this is a good generalization to understand what's going on at any one point in time in a fragmented society. But I do believe it sometimes becomes that ideologically extreme, yes.
Yeah, just another question, and just always making sure that, of course, religious identity is often associated with economic levels. Sort of in the Shia cases in Lebanon, we know they're more impoverished part of the population. So it's important when we talk about those religious differences, they don't happen to be in conflict over time for no reason, but it's competitions over scarcity. And that is also an important category to keep in mind for the students who just asked that question. You wanted to?
مرحبا Dr. Faysal. Hi. Just a question about Russia's role in the region. That we didn't talk much about the influence. I mean, given the fact that Bashar al-Assad right now is in Russia, and Russia might have to do something with Ahmed al-Sharia taking over, not sure. Do you think Russia has a role on making sure if the Iranian regime remain in power, determining on, you know, their power play in the area, in the region? So will that be a determining factor?
Yeah, the Russians have been a very, very interesting actor. I think the main kind of laboratory for testing them out was Syria, you know, and we saw that, you know, they covered Bashar al-Assad at the UN for years. They sent him, you know, technical advisors. They made sure, it was very important, but it was really only in 2015 where Bashar looked like he was actually in real trouble. And then they sent in their Air Force, and then they turned the war around. They wanted for him, you know, literally, they wanted for him. And then they wanted to play this kind of big uncle role where they were telling him, look, you know, you won the war, go make friends with this person, go talk to the Emiratis, go do this, go talk to the Saudis. And he's just an idiot who refused to do any of those things. But that's what they wanted him to do because they didn't want this long-term military investment in Syria, right? And in 2020, in 2022, I should say, this became an emergency situation for them because they had a much more important war to fight than Bashar al-Assad staying in power in Damascus. So they basically, when push came to shove and he was attacked by Ahmed al-Sharia, they left him alone. And they went and talked to Shaibani, the foreign minister of Syria, the Islamist foreign minister, after a decade of telling us that we need to kill everybody in Syria if possible so that we don't have an Islamist government in Syria. Turns out they're fine with an Islamist government in Syria. He went up to them, he's like, don't worry about your bases, don't worry about Tartus, we got it all covered, and they were fine with it. And they made friends with the new regime in Syria, and had no assets anyway to deploy there to save him. So now they're still there, and no one is getting rid of them. And there's no real push to get rid of them, despite the fact that they mass murdered so many Syrians. Everybody seems to be fine with them staying around, which is fine by me. But save Iran, or even do anything meaningful, they don't have the capacity. They're fighting this war of theirs, a very ugly, drawn-out war in Ukraine. It's not clear whether they can win it or not, and it's very resource-intensive, it's very manpower-intensive. I just don't see what capacity they can do to save the Iranians. I think they've got a huge, crucial geopolitical issue at their hands. So they should be concentrating on that, which I assume they are. I don't think they can do anything, personally.
As a Lebanese, can you give me some hope and tell me what would be the best scenario, the most positive scenario?
Sure, yeah. I'm
not as difficult as it is, but
I'm not in the business of doling out hope, but I'll try. No, look, there is a best case scenario, right? The best case scenario is this. There is a economic reconsolidation, there's a currency, there's a solution to the banking problem, there's a bailout, there's a settlement of debt, and life starts to go back to normal. Hezbollah, either because Iran is too busy for it or because they just understand that's life, decide that, you know what, Okay. Those days are done. Those days where we can assassinate whoever we wanted, start wars whenever we wanted, those are finished. Now we have interests to protect. We're going to remain an armed group in Lebanon. I know that's not your best case scenario, but that's mine. We're going to remain an armed group in Lebanon. No one's going to touch our stuff. You know, we're going to stay in the economy. You know, we're going to integrate more into the government. And that's the new Hezbollah. And the people of the South, not to mention the other impoverished people of the country, it's not just people in the South. So everybody else, they're going to get what we can give in terms of economic development assistance, given the capacity of the state. They can't get more of it because then that creates a problem with every other sect in the country. So they get that. And everybody, after one generation, settles into this is the new normal Lebanon. And this is not entirely impossible. It's just difficult. It requires a little bit of luck. It could turn out that Hezbollah will not accept this, you know, and then we have a real problem. It could turn out that the Lebanese government does not get its act together enough to get the bailout and to restructure the economy. A lot of bad things could happen. But I think for the first time in a long time, it's possible to imagine a better situation in the country. Possible to imagine a better situation in the country than before, whereas if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I told you it's completely hopeless.
And is it perhaps in that specific context that you, at the Turks who had made that proposal of a potential corridor that will go from Istanbul to Damascus to Jordan with an exit road to Beirut, just sort of one of those corridors that is on the political agenda these days, and that could provide hope for new economic incentives that is rivaling perhaps with Hezbollah and sort of shift the government in a different direction. So just a comment.
Yes.
I think there are the people who wants to. Mandy, you identify?
Hi, thank you again for sharing your knowledge.
Do you mind
with
just
us.
stand up because we cannot see you
sure.
from here.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, similar to the question about Hezbollah and their relationship with Iran and the funding there, how the instability in Iran is affecting the funding towards Hamas as well.
Hamas.
We moved to a more complicated place.
Yeah, whiplash.
I tried to
question.
avoid that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to say something maybe a bit controversial here. This Hamas, this is finished, and most certainly as an Iranian proxy experiment, definitely finished. So I don't see it as even on the radar. I see Hezbollah still as an open question. But to answer your question more generally, all of these problems, economic, social, military, security, that the Iranians have, all of it either leads to them doubling down on assets outside the country or saying, look, we can't afford this thing, you know? So far it's been we can't afford this thing. Less money, right? Money has dried up in Hezbollah's financial coffers. The sanctions are still very, very tough. Hamas, though, I never saw them completely as an Iranian proxy, first of all. And I honestly think, there's going to be some problem in Gaza and some people with guns and some that's going to happen for sure. But Hamas, I think is finished personally. But that's my own opinion.
It was a Sunni, but nonetheless received all its funding from Iran.
Yeah,
so.
that's always been. They've always been more flexible, obviously, because they have no other avenues or options. So they take money from whoever they can take.
Other question? Oh, Sami.
My question is, so one of your opening remarks, you mentioned that we may underestimate or overestimate the how durable enemies and friends are, especially in the Middle East. As you just mentioned, maybe Russia and al-Shara are making friends again. Who knows, maybe Saudi Arabia are making friends with Israel, and so on and so forth. I don't know if we can give any currency to this so-called board of peace that's happening now, but I thought I'd bring it up. we at first thought it would be about Gaza, but there's no mention of Gaza at all in its charter. If we can maybe it's all just about Mr. Trump's personal benefits or Tony Blair's personal benefits, but I won't ask who will be the benefactors, but who is trying to carve out a new seat at the table through this Board of Peace, and who is the definite losers that you can see?
Yeah. This is a bit of a difficult question. So obviously...
Maybe you want to explain a little bit the Board of Peace for those who...
I don't want to explain it, actually.
I can explain it.
Go ahead.
Well, the Board of Peace was established, as Sami was mentioning, as a way to manage Gaza during the 21-point plan of Trump's during summit of many Arab stakeholders in Sharm el-Sheikh. And then it morphed into something different, and it began to be sort of a, I wouldn't call it country club, but a place where you could become member if you pay a certain amount of money and then have influence on U.S. foreign policy. Some people could adhere to the Board of Peace, but not without paying, but that it wouldn't guarantee their membership in a long-term process, and others wouldn't. The caveat, the problem of that peace, the Board of Peace, was of course that Mr. Trump would remain at the head of it, whether he was in power or not, and would have ultimate veto power, and this would become an alternative to the United Nations Security Council. So
yes.
Now you can answer.
Yes, okay. So with everything that has to do with the Trump administration, I always offer like two levels of analysis, right? At the beginning, when it was the first Trump administration, I made the mistake of I either oscillated between maybe there's some sort of strategic brilliance going on here that I don't understand, or this is just stupid, you know? Now I've understood that it's a little bit of both all the time. And the superficial answer is that this is the first time in my memory, although maybe if I go back to like the 1800s, I don't know the presidencies very well at that point in time, but certainly the 20th century. Till now, I've never seen a U.S. administration that partly conducts its high-level strategic foreign policy on the acquisition of wealth. So of course, America does that all the time. We go, you know, there's oil here, there's this there. Okay, that's fine. Life is life. But I've never seen it personalized before, which complicates my analysis of all things that the administration does, because it's not familiar territory for me to try to understand how somebody could personalize themselves as the permanent leader of something, and how money goes in, or how you can go to the United Emirates and get them to buy your crypto stuff, or all this stuff for me is crazy. It's not the way I was trained as an analyst. So I'm trying to wrap my head around it. Having said that, there is some serious thing going on also. And it goes back to what we first started talking about with the delegation of delegation of power to other actors in the region, right? Basically the shedding of some responsibility and some weight as we turn to the Pacific and, you know, frankly also Russia and Ukraine still going on. And we say, you know, what is the club of respectable people who are now going to be stakeholders in this new Middle East? You know, that's the reason why it's not about Gaza. It's about creating a club of like-minded people who, at the end of the day, one way or the other, are going to have to sort their shit out, you know, together. And that includes, it could include the Israelis, it could include the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, all people that President Trump personally feels comfortable with as rulership style, and also from a geopolitical point of view, are compatible with broad American interests. You know, that's where I read this. Now, as for its likelihood of generating lasting peace in Gaza, etc., I mean, I don't think so. But it has other benefits and other tools. It's just a wacky way of doing it, but the principle is sound or understandable at least. That's my long answer to your question.
Any other questions? Okay, go ahead. Stand up. You're far if you stand up.
No, I was just waiting for the mic to work. Off of the question on the Board of Peace, to what extent is there longevity there, and to what extent is it just kind of a group of similar style leaders? So if it's Trump's kind of dream child to make this new institution or multilateral institution to export peace, will it last after he's gone, do you think? Obviously, I know there's some countries that have to pay $1 billion, and there's some that were just hand-selected, but how can it last, if it's just based off of a personalized leadership style? And thank you for being here also.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Look, honestly, I'm not being falsely modest. I really think you can answer this as well as I can. The thing is that I don't know what utility the man has if he's not president anymore. Maybe he has some utility that I'm not catching up on. I don't know how much this is them wanting to actually grab on to a strategic, it's not an alliance, but a strategic mechanism versus them wanting to make him happy, because I don't know the difference between those two things. And I honestly just don't know. I mean, I don't think this is the way these things are usually done in a lasting manner. It's personalistic. Sometimes we ask the same question about politics in America. What is this politics without this person? What is like the MAGA movement without Trump? I just don't know the answer to this question, and it's a good question, but I don't know how to answer it, honestly.
Okay, so I think that we have here just really gone through a long process discussing Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. I tend to be the hopeful one always in the crowd because I always look into the crack to think that something can happen. That's the reason why I'm working on economic corridors. So I want to leave always the audience with a hopeful note, telling you that there's been a realignment, a geopolitical shift that is happening in the region, and sometimes during those periods, new possibilities occur that people did not think initially, and so it requires political will and creativity, and we only hope that those will be seized by those of us who want to see those moments to lead to some peaceful cooperation. So on this note, I don't want to start talking about war anymore. On this note, I want to thank our guests who really gave us a wonderful insight about the region, and to the audience for being there. And thank you, and see you again.
Thanks.